Thank you and welcome to everyone who has come along tonight to listen to this very important launching of the Fair Employment Bill. First of all, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping, and that is to let you know where the exits are and the toilets, obviously. So there are ladies and gents toilets through that door there, and there are disabled friendly toilets in the hall through where you enter the building, and also you can exit there if needs be. I won't bother doing the in the event of cabin pressure dropping, the mask will drop in front of you because we don't have that. Without any further ado, I'm going to move on. Rather than introduce each person at the top table here, I'll introduce them as they're about to speak to you and tell you a little bio about each speaker. First of all, I'm chairing tonight. My name is Therese Maloney. I'm a proud member of IUnite Executive Council for our Irish region and a trade unionist of 40 plus years. Also proud to be a member of Trade Union Left Forum, or tuleft as we call it. I'll be chairing this session tonight, so without further ado, let me thank IUnite for the use of this premises to launch this very important document entitled the Fair Employment Act. It would be remiss of me not to give a very special thanks to Conor McCabe, who guided our hand in composing this bill, most of which Trade Union Left Forum feel may be the most important document put together by a group of like-minded trade unions for a long time. There's copies available, as you can see, on your seats for you to study and peruse at your leisure. I won't waste time going into the detail of the bill, as we have a number of speakers who will take you through various parts of our current legislation, which is the 1990 Industrial Relations Act, and how this Fair Employment Bill intends to address the wrongdoing to workers by the 1990 Industrial Relations Act. So our first speaker on my right here is Michelle Byrne. Michelle is a young rank and file trade union member in IUnite. She's the outgoing co-chair of the IUnite Youth Committee and is the current youth representative on the recently reconstituted ICTU Youth Committee representing the Waterford Trades Council. Michelle cut her teeth in the trade union movement by building relations with trade unions and students as the Deputy President and Campaigns Officer in the Union of Students in Ireland. Previously, as a IUnite community member, Michelle was very active in supporting the mandate ex-Debenham workers pickets and was involved in the occupation in the Waterford Debenham store. Now working in the non-profit sector, she's the shop steward in her workplace and equality representative in her branch, and has been a member of the Trade Union Left Forum for a number of years. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks very much. So as a trade union certified young person, and I know lots of other people here feel like they're a young person as well, young at heart, but for the sake of today and for the event that we're at, I guess we can probably define a young person as those who were born after the introduction of the Industrial Relations Act in 1990, 30 years ago. So young people like me, and older than me obviously as well, have never witnessed or remembered the pre-Industrial Relations Act era. We've heard about it, we've read about it, we wished about it, but for me, I learned about what the potential of what could have been and the huge workers' power that union members could show, all the stories from the past, from pre the Act, as I stood in solidarity with workers on the picket, that were picketing according to the Industrial Relations Act law at the time, at the Mandate Debenham strike, and it was one of the first pickets that I had actually visually seen. In the centre of the city, it was visible, and it wasn't a sight that I would see very often, unfortunately. Although I was from another union to the striking workers, as a community member initially, I stood in solidarity with those trade union members from another union to support their struggle. I was alongside retired members in my community branch, and we interpreted the law that, as community members and not in a workplace at the time, that we weren't breaking any secondary solidarity striking rules, but maybe someone else would say something different. It was on the picket there that I learned firsthand of the worries that the Industrial Act was causing, who was allowed to hold a poster with the mandate logo on it, if the workers were allowed to ramp up actions, or the threat of getting the union into trouble if things weren't followed by the book. And that book was designed obviously to work against them. While we were on the pickets, it was the retired members who were filling us in the stories of the momentous strikes in Waterford, for example. We had nearly 3,000 workers in Waterford Crystal, or the glass factory as it's known locally, and we heard the stories of the power of the general strike, and even the Waterford Soviet at some stages decades before that. So that's where my kind of knowledge of what the power of unions was before the Industrial Relations Act came in. It was not soon after the Waterford Crystal strike that the anti-union legislation in the form of the Industrial Relations Act in the 1990s was introduced. So that's over 30 years ago, and the memories of the power the workers had of those days are fading, with little to compare to now. But for young people, these are all stories, and we've never witnessed such action like that. But we're definitely itching for it. I see a lot of my committee from the youth committee here in the room, and we're seeing a lot of young people as well pour into the tenants union, Community Action Tenants Union, CATU, as members, and that's obviously as well because of the housing crisis. But there's also another reason for that too. It's because in that union you can take immediate direct action to protect their members, and it's having great success. And it's not just young people who are only facing difficulties in affording rent increases or housing precarity, but we also need our wages to keep up with the rising cost of living. And we should be able to take stronger actions in our workplaces, in our trade unions, to keep up with it too, not these dragged out processes. Young people like me and others have been raising it in our unions and trades councils, and it was at our request that the Waterford Trades Council has been pushing for action on this from ICTU since the newly passed motion at the ICTU BDC last year. It was young people across trade unions across the island who voted that for the #1 campaign for us to push on this year as a youth committee was against anti-trade union law north and south on the island, and that was just passed this month at our recent ICTU youth committee meeting. Students campaigning as well have also seen the direct effects of limitations of the law. So during the Fund the Future campaign a couple of years ago, which was supported by trade unions and had demands for staff and postgrads within that campaign, had to change its plans as staff could not walk out on campus as planned during the work hours without balloting or to even show solidarity. So this is creating big limitations on what could be done and reducing such an impact on the action and the campaign. And student members of USI then went on to pass a motion to abolish the Industrial Relations Act at the time. And solidarity between workers and students is obviously incredibly important, especially in their shared workplace. But many students are workers too, and of course we are future workers too. So working students are often in the most precarious work in low unionised places, with over 60% in services, hospitality, catering, and reducing the restrictions on union activity would allow for them to bargain for better wages in sectors that are notorious for low pay, bad conditions, precarious work and little union representation. The 1990 Act was introduced deliberately to restrict and control trade union activity and its members. It is fundamentally flawed and is one of the worst solutions of union rights in history of the state. Since its introduction, we've seen precarious employment, short-term contracts, bogus self-employment, the gig economy, privatisation, low pay and the general race to the bottom of workers' rights, which has led to a decline in union membership too. Decisions on industrial action should be left in the hands of workers and their unions without fear of repercussion. We need to secure better protection for organised labourers by strengthening the rights of unions to defend workers' interests without undue interference of the law and from employers. And we won't fix everything through legislation, but it's a step in the right direction and it will allow more power in the hands of the union. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. I suppose I should have said at the start what the plan is, that we will have all 3 speakers and then throw it out to the floor for questions. So if you have any questions that you want to ask Michelle, try and remember for the end. So my next speaker, or should I say, is going to give us a PowerPoint presentation on the bill, and that's Jimmy Doran on my far left. Where you'll always find Jimmy is the chair of Trade Union Left Forum and a member of Connect Trade Union. Jimmy will go through the Fair Employment Bill and the campaign against anti-union legislation to date.
Thanks, Tris. Yeah, so the Trade Union Forum was started back in 2011 or 2012, and originally it was started as a forum for left-wing trade union activists to discuss the problems within the trade union movement and the decline of the trade union movement and how we invigorate it again. And it took us about 5 years, but after about 5 years we identified anti-union legislation being the main barrier to workers and our struggle for better rights and better pay and all of that. So we started the campaign to abolish the 1990 Act. We did a kind of a trick thing. First we printed a whole load of stickers with abolished the 1990 IRA on it, stuck them all over Dublin, Belfast, Cork and Galway. It trended on Twitter and people were wondering who the hell is the 1990 IRA. So we followed it up then with abolished 1990 Industrial Relations Act. So it got a little bit of coverage from the offing. So very quickly, actually, 4 trade unions backed it, namely Mandate Trade Union, Connect Trade Union, Unite Trade Union, and the civil service section of Forza. So, as Michelle was saying there, the next group of the next generation of workers to back it was the Union Students in Ireland, which we were delighted because they represent 367,000 students. So, you know, it just shows the anger among particularly the youth, because it's the youth that's taken up what was left behind by my generation. And it's, you know, as I come to the twilight of my years in the trade union movement, it's time that we led the struggle for the youth and to regain what was given away under our watch. So the next, other unions had motions passed to how to say, reform the 1990 Act and other anti-worker legislation. But the turning point came, we were discussing it here during COVID in the steering committee, and we were wondering, our plan always was to get it to the floor of last year's ICTU conference, and we're saying it's gone too late now, we can't get it through union PDCs or anything like that. So we're saying what's left, and it came up the trades councils. So we thought we might be able to influence 3 trades councils, that was Waterford, Bray and Dublin Trades Council. And Dublin Trades Council came up trump, and I see Des there, went down there, and thanks Des. And Trades is on Dublin Trades Council as well. So they put forward a very cleverly worded motion that flew through the conference, unanimously backed, and it called for all rights lost under the 1990 legislation to be restored. So, you know, as things happen, very little has happened since then. So we were thinking about the progression. We were from there to stick to and to unions and stuff like this, but nothing's happened because, you know, these motions are passed and they're put on the shelf to gather dust and hope they go away. So we said, okay, we'll draft a bit ourselves, so should I say. So we tried, and it's a difficult procedure. I see Joan Collins down there, so she'd be well aware of this. It's not a simple act. So we asked Conor McCabe, Dr. Conor McCabe, the Labour historian and economist and activist, and to give us a hand, and he did. And he got, of course, free of charge. And so he did the first draft of the bill, and you know, the committee looked at it, and redrafted, and finally we came up with this version of the bill. But absolutely, you know, without Conor, we couldn't have done it on our own. So that brings us up to now, tonight. We're launching the bill, and so we want the slideshow. And the bill is called the Fair Employment Bill 2022, Miscellaneous Provisions Act. So it's an act to restore the cost of living and civil society remits of trade unions, to legislate for trade unions' right to access to members and workers in the workplace, to legislate for the trade union right to be heard in negotiations on behalf of members where collective bargaining is recognised and related matters. The next slide is definitions. We refer to, we say for argument's sake, the Act of 1941, and that means the Trade Union Act of 1941, the Act of 1990 means the Industrial Relations Act of 1990, the Act of 2005 is the Safety, Health and Welfare Act, Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005, that's why we don't put these things in every sentence, and we shortened that to the Act of 2005, and the same with the Act of 2015. The trade union movement means the aims and policies of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. The amendment to Section 2 of the 1941 Act, this is a clarification of definitions as they were. So an authorised trade union means a trade union in possession of a negotiation licence issued by the Minister under Section 5 of the 1941 Act. Collective bargaining. Collective bargaining extends to all negotiations which take place between an employer a group of employers, or one or more employers' organisations on the one hand, and one or more authorised trade unions or accepted bodies to which this Act applies on the other, for determining wages, working conditions and terms of employment, and or regulating relations between employers and workers, and or regulating relations between employers or their organisations or one or more authorised trade unions or accepted bodies. Again, the 1941 Act had to be updated to take that into account. So the original text in the 1941 Act says that the expression negotiation licence means a licence issued by the Minister under this part of the Act and is authorising the holder to carry out negotiations for fixing of wages and other conditions of employment. That will now be replaced with for the purpose of collective bargaining. So that's collective bargaining. So on then to the next slide. This is the right of the union to be heard. So in the section 10 of the Act of 1941, the original text says, where application is duly made for a negotiation licence and the applicant is shown to the satisfaction of the Minister to be an authorised trade union, the Minister shall grant such a licence. Now, from that, what we're proposing is that following such a licence is two or subsections. A licence, the right of an authorised union to represent its members for the purpose of collective bargaining, including grievance and disciplinary issues, shall be recognised by an employer and or group of employers and or one or more employers' organisations. And the next section of that is an employer that does not engage in collective bargaining shall engage in collective bargaining with an authorised trade union where there are at least 20% of the workplace are members of the authorised trade union. And when we say a workplace, if there's 15 factories in a chain of factories, a workplace is not the 15 factories, it's one factory. So if there's 20% one factory, you must collectively bargain. The next three slides now are the expansions of definitions of trade dispute, industrial action and strike. So I'll read the original text of the definition of a trade dispute according to the 1990 Industrial Relations Act. And a trade dispute means any dispute between members or between employers and workers which is connected with the employment or non-employment or the terms or conditions or affecting the employment of any person. Now, after employment, so I'll just recap, after employment, so we go back, means any dispute between employer and workers which is connected with employment or non-employment or terms and conditions of or affecting the employment or any of the social and environmental and economic conditions or any of the human rights of any person or community and furtherance of the aims and policies of the trade union movement. So that broadens the scope of trade disputes. And likewise, it does the same for industrial action. Industrial action will be for furtherance of the aims and policies of the trade union or the trade union movement, or the protection or advancement of any of the social and environmental and economic conditions, or any of the human rights of any worker, group of workers, or their families, their communities. And likewise with strike, it also includes furtherance of the aims and policies of the trade unions, or the trade union movement, or the protection or advancement of any of the social, environmental, economic conditions, or any of the human rights of any worker, group of workers, or their families, or their communities. So that's those three slides. On to slide 10, and this is key, and this is one that was specifically mentioned in the Dublin Council of Trade Unions motion, and it's the rights of an individual worker. As it stands, the individual worker is very much excluded from the process of industrial action under the 1990 Act, because if the place where the individual worker works has a procedure either by custom or practice in the employment or provided in a collective agreement for the resolution of individual grievances, all those procedures must be exhausted before any action can be taken. And that includes the WRC and rights commissioners, etc. And this process can take a very long time, a year or more in many cases. And what is happening, and this is one of the issues in the 1990 Act that has been really, really abused by employers. They'll target the troublemaker being the shop steward, the person who complains about health and safety, that there's no fire extinguisher there, or the fire doors are locked, or we're breaking the Working Time Act. These troublemakers are targeted and are sacked. These employers have deep pockets, they don't mind sacking him or her, and let it drag on for a year. Everybody has forgotten him then. His or her fellow workers will have said, they sack the shop steward, there's no hope for us, and they keep their heads down. And then it may go to the WRC and be found to be an unfair dismissal, and you get 15 grand. And 15 grand to these people is nothing. They just want people to be machines and work all the hours God sends with poor conditions. So that's why that is in there. So what we propose to do is, as I read out the original text there, if there is procedures that they must be exhausted, what we're suggesting that we should put in there, if a majority of the one individual's union colleagues decide to seek to avail of those procedures. So it'll be up to, it gives autonomy to the workers in the workplace. It'll be up to the workers to decide whether they're going down those procedures, or, as we'll see later on in the bill, 7-day notice is gone under our bill, so we can turn around and say somebody's sacked on a Sunday night, the full staff come in Monday morning, they hear the shop steward's been sacked, they take a ballot, a secret ballot in the canteen before they start work, and they decide to back the guy or the worker, and in the old parents they hit the bricks and they get the pickets out and they stand outside the place and close them down. It's as simple as that. But a good employer has nothing to fear of this. It's only rogue employers will be targeted with this. So it's a very important part of the legislation. So that protects individual workers. Slide 11 is just updating the 1990 Act from the start of section 14, which is secret ballots. And in 1990 it said that this section should come into operation 2 years after the passing of this Act. So we're amending that section now. So what we're saying is these amendments will come into operation after the passing of the Act. Now, section 14 of the 1990 Industrial Relations Act is the secret ballot. And unions aren't against secret ballots and workers aren't against secret ballots. But the 1990 Act treats unions as if they're some sort of a marauding rogue organisation that's going to, fiddle votes and have strikes at the drop of a hat and all this. Workers don't want to go on strike. Strike pay isn't very good, and they only go on strike when they're forced to go on strike. But now they're forced not to take strike with this legislation. So the Act as it stands says the union shall not organise, participate in, sanction or support a strike or other industrial action without a secret ballot entitlement to vote in which shall be accorded equally to all members who is reasonable at the time of the ballot for the union concerned to believe will be called upon to engage in the strike or any other industrial action. And what we propose to replace that with is, prior to industrial action by the union, it shall hold a secret ballot of all members whom it is reasonable at the time of the ballot for the union concerned to believe will be called upon to engage in strike or other industrial action. And that gives autonomy back to the union. The union decides, the workers decide themselves. We don't need a judge to tell us when we can go on strike. The judges and the judiciary of this country and most countries are no friends of the working class. So part B of that same section, section 14, we're on secret ballots still. The original text says the union shall take reasonable steps to ensure that every member entitled to vote in the ballot votes, and this is the key part now, without interference from or constraint imposed by the union or any of its members, officials or employees, and so far as reasonably possible that such members shall be given a fair opportunity to vote. So in other words, if there's a ballot going on for industrial reaction or industrial action, and somebody says, oh, I wouldn't vote for that or I would vote for that, that could be deemed to be interfering with the ballot injunction that we got, and the industrial reaction, industrial action, apologies, I keep saying reaction, be off. So what we're replacing that with is the union shall take reasonable steps to ensure that every member entitled to vote in the ballot is given a fair opportunity to vote. That was the case, that is the case, that always was the case, but the government decided to muddy the waters with a whole load of caveats onto it that they could latch onto in the courtroom and stymie industrial action. So we're doing away with that. This slide is, this is key as well, this is strike notice. So there's two slides to this phase because there's two sections, sections 1 and 2 of Part 19 of the Industrial Relations Act. So you'll see there in bold there of not less than 1 week. Right? So that's what we need to do now, to give a strike notice of not less than 1 week. So what we're suggesting is, where a secret ballot has been held, in accordance with the rules of the trade union as provided in section 14, the outcome of which, or in the case of aggregation of ballots, the outcome of an aggregated ballot, favours a strike or other industrial action, and a trade union before engaging in strike or other industrial action gives notice to the employer. They can keep their 7 days. We give notice and we decide what that notice is. So that's the 7-day notice. So that means that you can have immediate action where necessary. And workers won't do that unless it is necessary, because workers need to prepare for a strike too. Sometimes it's paramount that you act very quickly. The next slide is the same again. It's another section, but it's around injunctions. And again, instead of 1 week's notice, it's gives notice. So that brings us on to the right of union access to workers. This one is a little bit confusing because it's a long section to enact. So it's the Act of 2005 Health and Safety in Workplace Act. Excuse me. And Section 8 of the Act has Part 2 has subsections A to L, and we're including a Section M with 4 subsections. So it's a little bit complicated, but what this subsection does is it gives unions the right to access to workers. So the Section 8 Part 1 says every employer shall ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, safety and health and welfare at work of his or her employees by allowing a representative or representatives of a trade union to enter a workplace where sufficient notice has been given to the employer to deal with the following. Matters concerning health and safety of their members, to monitor compliance with the operation of the collective agreement, to consult with their members or any matters of concern, and to inform and advise workers of their right to join a trade union and the benefits of membership of and other related matters. Sorry, frog in the throat. This is the state working against me, probably.
The water?
Yes, the water. Didn't pay the water charges in there, probably. So that brings us on to slide 17, which is the updating of the 2015 Act to take into account of the collective bargaining definition that we added into the 1941 Act back before. So it now says the principal Act is amended by the insertion of the following sections after Section 1. For the purpose of this Act, collective bargaining, and we've read this out before, comprises voluntary engagement or negotiations between any employers or employers. Jesus. They're really taking the trouble here. Thanks, Gilly. Yes, Colin. Is yours actually as well?
Nope, just using it.
Sorry. So that's the definition of collective bargaining, which we have covered already, so I won't read it out again. And that's amended into the 2015 Act as well, because it's relevant there. So that brings us to the end of the slide. So the short title of the bill is the Act Maybe Side Fair Employment Act 2022. So Trade Union Forum are calling for the IUnite to launch a national campaign in conjunction with all affiliated unions and trades councils to seek the support of government, political parties, Dáil deputies, local authorities and wider society to amend the existing legislation and to introduce the Fair Employment Bill 2022, which would be the first step in starting the process to tip the balance of power back towards workers. So I recommend the Act to everybody. What you can do as people attending here today, if you're a member of a union, you raise it in your branch. If you're in employment, you raise it in your workplace. If you're a member of a community group, you raise it in your community group. Political party, if political parties call to your door, you raise it to them, you write letters to the paper, you take it on board, and you become active in your union, because it's not a spectator sport. Get involved and get active.
Thanks, Jimmy. That was a powerful presentation. We move now to our final speaker, who is Dave Gibney. Dave Gibney is currently a host on the Week at Work podcast and an activist with Left blog. He's been a trade union activist for 20 years. He helped establish and coordinate the Secure Hours Equals Better Future campaign, which led to the Employment Miscellaneous Provision Act, which provides workers with banded hours contracts, which means workers have access to income security. We'll be discussing the impact of anti-union legislation in Ireland. Dave.
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks to the Trade Union Left Forum for the invitation to speak on what I think is the most pressing issue in Ireland at the moment. We've all seen over the last number of months, in particular, the discussions around the cost of living crisis. And I'm always interested in observing the media and how it presents issues, and this is what we do on the podcast actually, is analyse it from a left-wing perspective. But it's always, what I've noticed is, it's always a focus on the increases in prices on essential goods, on energy and on house prices, rents and all the things that we need as workers to survive. But they never present as a solution the key solution, which is collective bargaining rights and enhanced trade union legislation. So I've been asked to speak about anti-union legislation in Ireland, and the first question that I've asked myself when I was pulling this together is our industrial relations legislation anti-union by comparison with other countries? And I was reading earlier on today the Forsa report on collective bargaining, which was launched last year, and in it they give some examples in different countries of how they incentivise workers to join trade unions. So, for instance, in Scandinavian countries, you get the Ghent system, where the trade unions more or less operate the social welfare system. So if you're not in a union, you may not have access to social welfare. So people are incentivised in that way. In other countries, they reserve some of the collective bargaining benefits specifically for union members, and therefore the so-called freeloaders or free riders don't get the benefits that the workers themselves get. And then even in countries where they've had, for the last 10 years, right-wing governments like Australia, they have, and Jimmy just discussed it there, the right to access. Now, I worked as an organiser over in Australia for a number of years, and I used the right to access legislation over there. It's called right of entry over there, but right of access is how we describe it here. And as an organiser, I could fax any company anywhere in Australia at any point in time and arrive within 24 hours, and they have to provide me with a room to discuss three things, or to do three things. One, do health and safety inspections to make sure that there's no lives at threat or under threat from the bad practice of the employer. Second of all, workplace rights inspections to make sure people aren't being paid below the minimum wage or the sectoral wage that exists. And the third one is for collective bargaining purposes. And it was the greatest recruitment tool that I've ever come across, because they had to provide me with a room, and everybody had to get an advertisement to say, Dave Gibney from United Voice will be in such and such a room at such and such a time for 3 hours on such and such a day. And people could just walk in, union member or not, and have a chat. In other workplaces, they gave me the canteen, so I sat in there for the whole day, and as people are coming and going, you talk to them about their entitlements. We don't have any of that in Ireland, any of them. The Ghent system, the collective bargaining benefits for union members or access. We have what I would describe as probably the most repressive and regressive trade union legislation in the developed world. We've no collective bargaining rights. Our strike restrictions are extremely difficult to navigate with constant threats from employers in the strikes that I've been involved in over the years, which includes Tesco, Dunnes Stores, Lloyd's Pharmacy, Marks and Spencer's. There's a whole range of big strikes that I've been involved in, and almost always you're getting a threat from an employer that you're going to be sued for every penny you have. So yeah, the strict restrictions. I don't know if people remember the Ryanair strike a couple of years ago in the German pilots. Of course, this is a great example, because all of the pilots across Europe, all of the different groupings of pilots were threatening strikes. In Ireland, the Ryanair pilots had to give 7 days notice before they could go on strike, and Jimmy referred to that earlier on. In Germany, they gave 24 hours notice and said, we're only giving this 24 hours notice to not disappoint and upset the public. They didn't have to give any notice, they could just go out whenever they want. And I think that type of action, or that type of legislation, would be very beneficial, because again, on the strikes that I've been involved in the week leading up to the strike, after you hand in notice that you're going to go on strike or workers are going to go on strike, that company will tend to spend the whole week trying to bust that strike, to break that strike, threaten workers. And I do find that interesting. I'm going to bring this up later on. You mentioned it there, but ballot interference. There's legislation there for unions interfering in their own ballots, but there's no legislation to stop an employer from interfering in the ballots of a union. So we had that situation in 2017, balloting the Tesco workers. 23 stores were being balloted at that moment in time, and the company told all the workers, if you ballot for strike action, you're going to lose your family income supplement. It got so heated that we had to get the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Social Welfare to explain that you will not lose your family income supplement if you go on strike. These are the levels of threat. People are, not only are you, because if you lose your family income supplement, you don't lose it for a week or 2 weeks, you lose it for the entire year, and you might not be entitled to it the following year. So you can imagine the terror among low-paid workers who are trying to keep their families going. So, yeah, we've no right to access, which I've addressed. And the impact of all of the negative legislation, I suppose, is the big thing that we all need to focus on. It's the prevalence of low pay. Second highest prevalence of low pay in the EU. But beyond that, what does that mean, low pay and insecure work and all the rest of it? 661,000 people in Ireland are living in poverty at the moment. 781,000 are experiencing deprivation. And 133,000 people living in poverty are actually in employment. They're in jobs, but they're referred to as the working poor. You know, I'd argue that the figures they use for that are below, they're not accurate. And I'd say it's a lot more. But there's 5,400 people in this country die preventable deaths every year due to economic inequality. The inability to be able to afford decent healthcare or to go to a doctor and pay the bills. And again, last month we saw, just over 2 months ago now, we'll be waiting on the new figures, we're back up over 10,000 homeless people. Now that's all related. That's all related to people having low incomes and not having a decent social wage to go with it. And that's a social wage is important to remember as well, because if you have strong trade unions, you're going to get a strong social wage. But in terms of identifying how bad it is out there on this stuff, I've selected a couple of, in terms of IR legislation, selected a couple of key indicators that I think explain the need for stronger trade union legislation. And the first one, and a really important one, is wages as a proportion of the economy. Now they don't give out the figures of wages as a proportion of GNI, so you have to use the figures they use, wages as a proportion of GDP. In 1960, Irish workers took 66% of the income produced in this state. 66%. Today that figure is 34%. We have seen the biggest decline in wages as a proportion of the economy in the OECD. Out of the 60 countries that exist in the OECD, the fastest decline in that, other than Romania. Romania is the only country that had a faster decline in wages as a proportion of the economy. We're now the third lowest in the entire OECD in terms of how much workers take out of the economy, behind Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Every other country has got far higher. And just to compare to some of our contemporaries, the likes of the UK and the USA, their share of the economy in the USA is 58%. Compare that with us, 58%. Workers take home 58% of the produce or the profits of the money in the economy in the United States. And in the UK it's 57%, where we're 34%. We're nearly half the rate that they take home. And in the period of time from 1960 to now, the UK lost 7% and the USA lost 5%, but we lost 32%. So it goes to show you how weak we've become now. The second indicator I go on about, and I'm always banging on about this, is the days lost to industrial disputes. In 1979, there were 1.4 million days lost to industrial disputes in this country. 1.4 million days. Last year, there was 22,000 days. So from 1.4 million to 22,000. The reason I raise that is because of the Lloyd's Pharmacy dispute. Those workers took 10 days of industrial action. They'd never been in a union before, most of them. They had only joined. And immediately from joining and taking action, they were able to get a 35% pay increase. That was in 2017. Now, nobody was winning 35% pay increases in 2017, but workers who joined a union and went and took industrial action got 34% pay increases. So it's important that workers are enabled to take action when necessary. These were workers, by the way, who were on 0-hour contracts. They were eradicated and on extremely low pay, mostly on the minimum wage. Now they're on decent wages above the living wage itself. Next indicator about this that shows us how strong or weak trade unions are in this country is wage theft. Something that's very seldom talked about in Ireland, but really talked about in a lot of other countries. The most recent figures from the WRC report says that 1.6 million euros worth of unpaid was recovered from workers in Ireland in 2020. Now, 2020 was the COVID year, the beginning of the lockdown and all the rest of it, so they didn't do as many inspections in that year. So if you look at the previous year, the figure was 3.9 million. Now, there's only a handful of inspections going on at any particular time because the WRC can't get to everywhere. Just to give you an idea, so in retail alone, there was 334,000 people, or 334,000 euros recovered in unpaid wages from about 5,000 inspections. Now, retail employs 308,000 people. It was from 600 inspections. They inspected 600 workplaces, and they recovered 334,000. In the food services, it was 330,000 euros of unpaid wages was recovered. So it shows you a lot of employers are out there underpaying their staff, paying them less than the minimum wage, not giving them their breaks, a whole range of things, and the penalty for it is nothing. If you're caught underpaying your workers, usually what happens is you're told, just pay them. Just give them the money you're owed. It's like me walking into a bank, robbing the bank, walking out the door, and the guards grab me and say, just put it back. Doesn't happen. There's no repercussions for most employers when they do this stuff. Another key indicator obviously is profits. How profitable is it in this country? Now, it's profitable in some sectors, and I'll speak about the one I'm most familiar with, retail. In retail, we have the most profitable country in the EU to be a multinational retailer. I've seen estimates of from Eurostat that show that for every employee a multinational retailer has, they make 42,000 euros in profits. Obviously, a lot of employers here don't even have to publish their profits. They lump them in with the UK figures, and we never find out how much they've actually made. But for a company like Dunnes Stores, if we knew how much they were making, if you were to extrapolate that, that's over 300 million euros in profit they're making. While their workers are being paid, 11 euros an hour. And same for Tesco. So some of the biggest multinationals we have in this country in retail are making a fortune. And that's because workers can collectively bargain and enhance their pay and conditions of employment. So in terms of the anti-union legislation that exists, I mentioned one there about the ballot interference, but another one that came across my mind just this morning was obstructing customers. If I'm on a picket line and I ask a customer of an employer not to pass the picket, that's a breach of law. But if the union or if the employer tells workers don't join a union, it's not a breach of law. So why are the rules skewed to stop us interfering with them having customers, but there's no law around them stopping us getting members? And we see it all the time. We see those threats, and I mentioned the Tesco one earlier. I heard Jimmy talking on the radio this morning around political strikes. The Dunnes Stores anti-apartheid strike was one of the proudest moments in the world for trade unions. That started in July 19th, 1984 and lasted for 2 years and 9 months. Can't do that anymore because it's a political strike. It can't strike for individual issues because you've exhausted procedures. And then the big one as well, and it was mentioned by Michelle, strategic insolvencies is still not being dealt with. Now, it's not like they haven't had long enough. We've seen the Paris Bakery, we've seen Cleary's, we've seen Licenza, we've seen H&V, we've seen over and over again, we've seen Debenhams most recently, and we saw then Arcadia, and still they haven't done anything on it. Still they're sitting on legislation and pretending that they're working on this stuff. So, look, I commend this bill, and I hope it gets as far as it can within it all and gets passed. And I do see it as a starting point because I think there's a suite of trade union legislation that needs to be passed in this country. One, to make it easier for workers to join a trade union. Two, to make it easier for workers to take industrial action. And three, to make it easier for workers to collectively bargain. And this bill goes some way to dealing with some of those issues. Because the rules of the game, as I've mentioned here, and we can see it, it's very clear, the rules of the game are not fair. They're not written by our class to help our workers to get the best that they can. They're written by theirs. And it's the equivalent of me hopping into a boxing ring with Mike Tyson and one arm tied behind my back. I'm not going to win, lads. So we need to level the playing field. We need to make sure that legislation helps workers to help themselves, helps workers to get themselves organised. It's not about trade unions, it's about workers getting themselves organised as a collective. So, and the last point I'll make is that in order for this to pass, and we saw it with the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Act, how quickly and efficiently IBEC mobilised, and we saw it with the Right to Water campaign as well, how the other side could, resisted and mobilised. There will be huge resistance to anything that's going to help workers to take more out of the economy or out of their employer and put it into their pocket. So in order to do this, it's not just a case of tabling legislation. That's never worked. You have to mobilise across the country. Every trade union does, every trade union member does. With the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Act, Dunnes Stores workers lobbied every single TD, turned up at every single clinic that they could, all across the country. And still it wasn't enough. Still we had to keep pushing and keep publishing the names of TDs who refused to sign the petition that we had set up with Uplift on that. I leave it at that, available to take questions and all the rest of it, but look, we all have to get mobilised behind this if we're to tackle any of the inequalities and all of the poverty figures and the deprivation figures and the cost of living crisis that faces everybody. It's not going to get easier if we don't have stronger trade union legislation.
Thanks, Dave. Now, what I'm going to do in order to be fair, so everyone gets a chance to ask questions, I'll take the questions in blocks of 3, if that's okay with the panel. And if you have if you want your question specifically answered by one of the panel members, if you'll ask that, so just give me your name when I call on you, and just say if you're a member of trade union, what trade union you're a member of, and then if you want your question answered specifically by one or more of the panel members. Okay, so I'm going to start with this gentleman here.
John Martin, current member of Forset, the retired members group. I've been a trade union activist for 60 years. I'm now 72 years of age, and I was on the national executive of the Irish Municipal Employees Trade Union when this unconstitutional act was brought in, and I fought both within the union structure and as I was a delegate to the Dublin Council of Trade Unions, that the Act of 1941, the Trade Union Act, was unconstitutional because the Constitution does not recognise anything other than the word union, that any citizen can join a union. So the word trade union in the 1940 Act was unconstitutional. A union is a group of citizens who come together to work on the issue that they have come together on, and the Constitution recognises that. Outside of that, they don't recognise the name outside that. The Constitution does not recognise the name outside that we give to ourselves. That's why in 1990 it was named the Industrial Relations Act. That is the relations between one citizen and another, or a group of citizens and another. Immaterial, the fact that one is an employer and one is an employee. Now, Safe, Healthy and Welfare at Work Act, that's not. The Industrial Relations Act of 1990, and I fought for it and I'm still fighting for it, was totally and absolutely unconstitutional and should have never been accepted by the Irish Congress of Trade Union or any trade union in Ireland at that time. I asked them to go to the High Court for judicial reviews, and I don't think we had the same familiarity with the European Court of Justice or the UN. But they had every alternative to go for the judicial review under the Constitution on this. In a number of cases they didn't do it. Now, we're in an era where I restrain myself, and very forcefully I have to do it, from criticising the organisations that we're in at the moment. It is not the time for criticism outside the organisations that we're in. We can do it inside, but we're looking for unity. I'm a member of the Community Action Tenants Union, and the reason I joined that is because I was a very active member of the National Association of Tenants Organisation, which you're researching, and when I heard that, I was absolutely wonderful. I have given my interview, and I'm pushing for the researchers and yourselves to give us the historical boot of that, dare I say it, people's social movement of its time. It was the social movement of its time. It was the biggest social movement in Ireland. And I don't think outside the trade union movement it has actually been matched. And what you're doing for that is you're doing the research on that. So The union, I'm happy to be a member of now at the moment. And as I said, I probably, as you said yourself, I'm probably only the one person over the age since 1930.
What's your question, please?
The question is, number one, unconstitutional, right? Number one. Two, can we fight it on the constitutional basis as well as trying to get it through the door on the two fronts? It is a great, where we do or not, or where we're successful or not, it is a great campaigner to get the kind of, dare I say it, solidarity in all the organisations that we have. And another question I'm going to ask, and I have to ask it, is how can the Trade Union Left Forum, as a radical movement, what is the definition in the 21st century of a good employer?
Emilio.
Yeah. Well, I have mainly three questions. The first one is about the engaging in collective bargaining. You said that it's 20%, but what happens if you have a shop where it's agency workers and direct workers employed by an employee? So what that 20% account? The second question is, based on all this legislation that I read before we start the meeting, in which place the joint labour committees will end up? Because I think after this piece of legislation, there's no need for joint labour committees, or at least not for the amendment of 2012 that reduced them to 6 and so on. And the last thing is, what's your agenda? What's your plan for campaigning around this bill? Because I think there is a good piece of legislation, and I think that we need to take accountance of how many people will support this piece of legislation, and as well, we need to know for how long we are going to be campaigning. And last thing that I want to say is thank you for all of you for this great presentation, and thank you for inviting us here.
Thanks, Emilio. The gentleman with the...
Yeah, Damien Keogh, Independent Workers Union. Just three questions. One, in relation to the bill itself, from the speakers here, I understand that it will go to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and they will be the sponsors of the bill. I'm not sure whether I got that right or not. I just want to ask you, is that the situation? The second question is, in the second amendment, it's called accepted bodies. What would be the accepted bodies? And the third question I want to ask is, in relation to the 20% of the workforce, let's say we put this scenario to you, that there would be 20% of the workers who would be in a union that wouldn't be affiliated to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I assume that the bill would recognise them for negotiation purposes.
So does the panel want to deal with those questions, or is anyone...
Yeah. Okay, so I'll deal with a few of them, okay? John's question, definition of a good employer. A good employer is an employer that recognises your union, that pays you a fair and decent wage and gives you decent work.
Or he's still robbing you.
Well, you know, like we live in a capitalist world.
He's still robbing you.
Yeah, absolutely. We live in a capitalist world. You know, I'd love a socialist Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, and I struggle for a socialist Ireland every day. But unfortunately, we don't live there, and we're not in that situation now. But under capitalism is an employer that treats you fairly, pays you a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and you know you've got decent paying conditions. Lazio's, is that your name? Lazio, yeah?
Emilio.
Sorry. Emilio. I don't know where that was. It must be the frog in the throat. Yes, it would be head. It must be one of those magic frogs in liquor or something like that. So, the thing about agency and direct workers, it doesn't really matter. It's a workplace, and that's why we put in workplace rather than employer for that reason. So if there's agency workers in this workplace, we say in this room here, we say we make Christmas trees. So if the people working here making Christmas trees, and some of them are agency workers, some are contract, some are direct staff, Well, if 20% of them are in the union, that's when that kicks in. The plan of campaign and how long will it last? Last we win, and that's the situation. It's come this far now, and as I said in my introduction, the key moment was the Dublin Council of Trade Unions motion, which was unanimously passed. So now it is the official policy of all affiliates to ICTU to look for this legislation. Of course, ICTU and the affiliates have done very little about it. So if they weren't going to do it, well, we said we'll do it. We'll see what happens as a result of that. I don't see too many union officials here. They were all invited. They know what's happening. I move in trade union circuits myself every day, and people know exactly what's happening. But they're a little bit quiet, including my own union. But we'll see what develops from that. There's a number of politicians here today, or two, John Collins and Kieran Perry is in, maybe he's gone. We would like Joan and Kieran to publicly back the campaign. We've had inquiries from several, how would I say, senior politicians, high-profile politicians. How have we got backing? Have we got sponsors? Are we looking for them? And to give you a hint, we asked them, are you a volunteer? So that might give you an idea of the identity of the party we're talking about. So there is people sniffing around, and there's plenty of others in independent and small parties as well looking around. So the campaign, as I said, after the presentation of the bill, we have to ourselves as individuals get involved in our unions, get involved in our communities. Everywhere you go, you have to promote this, and also explain to people who've never heard of the 1990 Act what workers are not allowed to do. And the restrictions that Dave gave examples for there is unbelievable. The stuff that you cannot do. And when we think back years ago, what you could do, Mick O'Reilly, remember this union wrote a book there from Lazarus to something or other, but it's his history, 50 years in the trade union movement. And if you read the amount of strikes that fellow was involved in, and to drop the hat, they were out on the picket line, and they won rights. I was on the radio there today, and LMFM, and the guy who was interviewing me says to me, "Are you trying to take us back to the 70s when we had to have candles in our houses and we'd have to spend the night not looking at telly, And I said, well, it's in fairness, those nights that you sat behind the candle without the telly won the ESB workers decent paying conditions. So I'm not going to complain about not watching telly for a night if we got the people decent paying conditions, and that's what we need to do. So we need to organise and focus people's minds on it. Eamon's question about are we asking ICTU to sponsor this bill? Well, this was a motion that was passed at the ICTU BDC, so first and foremost, they're supposed to be backing. So, Damien, sorry, Damien. So they first and foremost, they should be backing it. So we're putting it up to them now to back it, and all the affiliate unions. As far as the Independent Workers Union are concerned, they're outside Congress, but if they want to back it, they want to back it too. The 1990 Act works against the Independent Workers Union as well, So in that sense, this Act, if it comes in, it will protect all workers. So if there's an individual worker who's a member of the Independent Workers Union, as it stands now, you have to go through all the procedures. If this comes in, it won't. If the Independent Workers Union decides to take strike action, and now they have to give 7 days notice and all these caveats of this, they won't have to now. So, in that sense, this is built for all workers. Well, for all union members. The accepted bodies, I don't really know what was meant by that. And the 20% of the workforce, or what if there's 18%? If there's 18%, you can build it up to 20% quick enough. If there's 2%, you've got a problem. But if you've got 18%, you're more than halfway there. So, I wouldn't be happy with 18% union in a job. It's a great start. But, if 1 in 5 are members of the union, it's up to you to, hit them, I don't mean hit them, metaphorically speaking. Have a chat with them when you can't see them, or in the pub, or whatever, and encourage others. Dave, maybe you want to take some of those other questions?
Can I have a follow-up?
No,
it's okay, then it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to respond to one or two of these as well. Just in terms of the JLCs you mentioned, well, the JLCs are irrelevant. For people who don't know, the Joint Labour Committees were supposedly restored in the 2015 Act, but it requires the two parties, the employers' organisations and the trade unions, to cooperate and sit down and come up with a sectoral agreement. the way the legislation is framed is that if one side decides not to engage, there is no JLC. So, for instance, there used to be a JLC in retail. There should be one now, but the retail employers are refusing to engage. So, why would they? It might end up with decent paying conditions for workers in the retail trade, and they're getting all the profits that are there. So, what some unions have been campaigning for and calling for is that in the absence of the employers in the JLCs, in the absence of the employers engaging in the JLCs, that the minister or the court can issue a recommendation without them. So let them not turn up and let's give a sectoral agreement without their presence. He mentioned about the plan and how long was the plan and the need to campaign. I mean, I said it at the end, it's going to be very, very difficult, but you know, this is something that I think a lot of people are interested in. We surveyed Dunnes Stores workers there a couple of years ago and asked them, do you want the right to trade union representation? And 98% of Dunnes Stores workers said yes. So we keep getting told that if we had a referendum on this stuff, that we'd lose the referendum. But my experience, and we might, but my experience from asking workers in low-paid sectors is, if you want the right to representation, they generally say yes. In terms of the accepted bodies, Damien, you asked about accepted bodies. I know it's in it there, and accepted bodies, I believe, was first mentioned in the 1941 Act, but it was copper fastened there in the 2015 Act. And that's what ISNI, the Irish Small Medium Enterprise Employer Representative Group, came out almost immediately once that Act, and you can, I have this piece of advice that they issued to all of their members on it in a PDF. As soon as that Act came out and explained and gave a definition of accepted bodies, they issued a 2-page recommendation to all of their members saying, this is how you set up an accepted body, this is how you set up, this is how you union bust before the legislation even comes in. I'll put that up, I'll give it to you and you can post it on the Trade Union Left Forum Facebook page later if you want. I personally see the need to get rid of this phrase of accepted body. Again, coming back to the legislation, unions, there's definitions around unions not interfering, but there's nothing about accepted bodies interfering as well. We had the situation in Lloyd's Pharmacy in 2017, went to the Labour Court, we took them to the Labour Court, they openly said to the Labour Court, we gave 10,000 euros to set up an accepted body, and the Labour Court did nothing. So this is a body set up by the employer, with people on the body selected by the employer, because the 2015 Act says if you have an accepted body in your workplace, then a union can't come in and organise. So they're now using these accepted bodies in the private sector to avoid collective bargaining as well. So we need to get rid of accepted bodies or completely reframe how they're mentioned in it. Damien, again, you asked about would the bill enable non-union. So my understanding of how bills work, and I've done this for a long time, is that ICTU can't sponsor the bill at all. It has to be TDs. So you can have Joan can sponsor the bill, Sinn Féin can sponsor the bill, whoever's in the Oireachtas can sponsor the bill, but nobody outside of the Oireachtas can sponsor a bill, and therefore it's not their bill. It becomes the TD's bill, and whoever is behind the TDs and campaigning around this stuff. So would the bill enable non-ICTU unions to function? Of course it would, because you are licensed under the 1941 Act, so you can do everything that a union within Congress can do. So I don't think there's any interference on that stuff. So I think that's.
Michelle, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to come in on that campaigning piece as well on your question, Leo. I think it would be great to have more than one party or more than one TD sponsored, so that it doesn't become a party political football and that it becomes untouchable because certain parties backed it and other, we see this all the time where one party backs it and everyone else backs away. I think it's really crucial that we are talking about this in our branches and actually getting your branches to collectively, locally go to your TD. So that's talking about emailing them and actually meeting them to chat about this. We need to make it so unpopular for them not to back this that they'll be worried about their votes, but it won't be on their agenda unless their local people are speaking to them. Like, yes, you can put it out on social media or whatever you want, but unless they know that a voter is coming into a potential voter in their local area is coming into their office to talk about this, then it won't be on their agenda. So I think that's a crucial part of this as well. And if you have a look at the Trade Union Left Forum website, we have a load of resources on how you could campaign around abolishing the 1990 Act. The same tools can be used again for this bill, talking about bringing it to your branch, talking about bringing motions, all of that, just get it on the agenda. But the crucial piece here is, because this is hopefully going to be brought into the Dáil soon, is actually speaking to your TDs, but you need to get the numbers of people speaking to your TDs, not just yourself. So it is a bit of an organising campaign itself as well.
I just want to point to that as well. We must remember that the Right to Water campaign, when the trade unions backed it was a branch of the union down the wall that passed a motion in support of right to water, and that's where it all really got big. So there is power in the union, there is power in a branch of the union, there is power in a trades council, as there went down there, and his motion that went through there, you know, has got us to where we are now. So, you know, it's up to people to get creative in your head, be fantastical and inventive, and get out there and do the work. But it won't happen on its own.
I have at least 2 other people with their hands up, 3 now. So I'll move into the next section. The guy who asked the question, are you happy enough there?
Yeah, just, no, the reason I asked, I'll try to be very brief. The reason I asked about the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and I remember being in the O'Lahain Hall just before that, and we as a union condemned the act. Who acquiesced to it? The Irish Congress of Trade Unions. And that must be remembered. I don't want to be bringing up the past, because a lot of them that are there probably weren't there when the 1990 Relations Act. But it was stated that it would be the death knell to the trade union movement, and that subsequently is what happened.
Yeah. Yourself.
Yeah, my name is Michael O'Brien. I work for the International Transport Business Federation. I'm a rank and file member of IUnite and belong to a member of the Socialist Party as well. So just from the point of view of my party's support, you can take it as read. My comrade Mick Farrelly will support this, and he had out put his name to the bill as well, alongside hopefully other deputies likewise. And obviously what's in the bill will represent a serious advancement in terms of workers' struggle. I thought it was interesting what Dave said about the qualm about accepted bodies and his preference to that be taken out of the bill. And if the bill, as drafted in front of us, is not the final word before it goes into the DAO, but then I'll pose 2 other questions about for consideration for inclusion. First is one of the provisions of the 1990 Act that I recall is that after, let's say, a branch or a workplace ballots for strike action, the executive has to ratify that after the fact, and that in itself can be a cause of delay and frustration. And obviously, if the executive of the union happens to be a bit more conservative in its outlook than a particular workplace branch, whether that can be a cause of frustration. I'm sure we can find case studies where that happened. And to me, it speaks to why maybe ICTU were cooperative in the introduction of the bill in the first place. Because for me, the introduction of the bill in part was a power grab away from the shop floor and the factory floor. So the idea of actually giving the branch or the workplace the right not just to vote, but not to have a vote overturned by its own executive, I think is something that needs to be considered. The other question I pose is can be more put in the bill to actually enhance picketing rights? Because I think in our experience, the biggest impediment to successful struggles is people being pushed off a picket and being not permitted by law to impede strike breaking and so on and so forth. And I know the Act says something about how pickets are meant to be conducted, and I know the employers typically don't allude to the Act, but more so to injunctions. But still, if there's any enhancements that could go in from the point of view of vindicating the right to picket effectively, I think that would be extremely relevant. Just the last thing I'll say is a comment about the campaigning side of things. To my mind, I think we have to look back at episodes where the Act was turned into a dead letter. Irish Ferries, Gamma, Greyhound, and others where people pushed the boat out and defied the Act, but because of the overall political temperature in Irish society, the establishment, the boss class didn't feel confident to punish. And you know, we have to be, I'm not advocating willy-nilly the fines are putting the assets of unions at risk. We should look at those episodes, because the other example that I'm giving, water charges and other civil disobedience, so was that the battle was won in society for turning bad laws into dead letters, and then the legislation actually came after the fact. So I think that has to be part of the remit of combating the Industrial Relations Act as well. Thanks, Chair.
Yourself.
Yeah, I would like to thank the committee first and foremost for all the hard work they've done, because obviously at my age, I'm like Jimmy in the twilights of my labour years, but I do remember all the different struggles that I've been involved in over the last 30 odd years. So the question I want to ask is to push this forward, as you mentioned about targeting TDs, and hopefully in the next election we might have some sort of, and I said in converted commas, left-leaning government. So it's very important that we do, maybe using the websites to name and shame anyone, any TD, no matter what view they come from, of who's going to support this. Use Uplift. You know, let's get involved, the lady down there, with the LGBT campaign, the Repeal the Eighth campaign. Use whatever methodology we have to use. Call in everyone and try to get something focused that anyone in any village in Ireland can say, there's a tool here on this website, this is what you do. Make it very, very simple. Okay, A, B, and C, this is where we go, this is what you say, this is what you ask. Do you know what I mean? This is not going to be something that's going to be done the next couple of years. You could be looking at 10 years' time we have this act in. But let's do it. You know what I mean? Let's just put all the politics, all that sectarian nonsense out of her and get this done for ordinary, decent working people, because that's what we deserve.
Joan?
Yeah, John Collins, Welsh Change, I'm a member of CWU, Communication Workers Union, and a member of the IUnite, the community branch as well. Listen, I've been on many picket lines and on many fights for workers' rights, and it is absolutely very clear how this legislation, 1990 Act, has been used against workers continuously. But I also want to make a point about legislation. We've had the water public ownership legislation in the Dáil for nearly 6 years. It's stuck in third stage of committee for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael are just burying it, just won't let it go anywhere. The bill that Mick Barry put down for the Dublin workers in relation to them getting forced preference and what's it called liquidation. That was introduced last year, and the government put an amendment into it saying that we could be reviewed in a year and would be looked at. That still hasn't happened. It was 2 weeks ago. So legislation, the only legislation I remember was very successful was legislation on banded hours, because of that campaign that was launched around that, and the pressure was put on TDs and got them to sign it and whatever. So it's that type of societal thing that has to happen as well, and push the legislation through. And I think it is important that we do try and push it through at this stage, bring it in. We won't get it passed, it's highly unlikely, but it's to put it up there, try and get a bit of a movement around it, and then if in the next election there's a left-leaning type of government coming into play, that they would have already bought into it as such, and pressure could be put on them after that then to probably introduce it. So that's just my thinking on it. But certainly I would support the bill and sign it. And that the other thing you could actually do as part of it is if you could gather yourselves to contact the speakers of the different parties in that on industrial relations, and to arrange to meet with them specifically and get them to go into it, and then maybe along with that we do things like in the AV room, invite other TDs along to it, just building up and wrapping her up, but it has to be under your direction as well from the point of view of campaigning and that thing.
Thanks, Joan. So do we want to do with those three first, and then I'll move to the next batch of speakers? I'll start on this side. Michelle, did you want to come in?
Yeah, there was a lot of great ideas actually there, and I think the important thing to note is, like, yes, there's a few of us here at the top of the table, but the forum is an open forum, and campaign ideas, like, feed them in, because this is as much as ours as it is yours. So I think like that idea that those ideas, Jones, that you're sharing are really useful, and we can of course try to arrange those meetings on the AV invites. We're talking about the organising around the elections as well. I think that's a great idea. I think actually lobbying for this to be on the programme for government discussions would be great as well. And if, of course, we can get it into the budget discussions as well, even better, because I feel like that's going to become an election issue too. And I know a few contacts in Uplift. I can see if they'll set up a tool for sending out an email to TDs about this issue as well. And yeah, I think the suggestions, Michael, that you made are very useful. And I think whoever decides to sponsor this bill, basically, that discussion will be had again if there's any amendments that need to go in before it's actually sponsored officially. And so I think there's a great one, we'll pass them on as well. But yeah, that's all my comments on those. Thank you.
Dave, ready?
Yeah, similar to what Michelle said on a lot of this stuff, just in terms of the taking out or reformed part where you mentioned that it's not a final presentation on the bill or whatever. I mean, the bill has to go through the Oireachtas, and there's going to be a lot of amendments made in there anyway. So these things should be, this forum here should be for these types of discussions around things that could strengthen it anyway. But I think it's a good idea on the NEC to ratify. Having said that, during the COVID period, unions have changed how they operate. We can get an NEC sanction in the space of an hour now because of Zoom. I can call an emergency meeting of the officers of the union and get the NEC to do it quite quickly. Which has been used in the past. Effective picketing, I was on the Greyhound pickets, obviously not as a worker, not as an official of the union, work for a different union. We got up every morning and did what the Communities Against Low Pay were doing for Lloyd's Pharmacy and everything. We're not covered by the Act because we're not involved in the dispute, so we were blocking trucks all over Stony Bar for hours on end and being really effective. And I think that's where groups like this coming together is really important as well, as people who cannot be prosecuted under the 1990 Act and their union can't be prosecuted. So I think that's something as well that trade unions need to engage in. Obviously there was nobody from SIPTU on those mornings. We just had a local community group that just went out and blocked every truck that tried to get by. Paul and Joan are going to address two parts, every tool and all the rest. I think it's important that how this campaign is phrased. Like Fair Employment Act or bill is a really good way of putting it. It spells it out quite clearly. This can't really, in my opinion, be about trade union representation. This has to be about workers' representation, workers' entitlement to be represented by a trade union of their choice. Important difference there, because if you go to a worker in retail and you say to them, do you want a collective bargaining right? They won't include a lot of what you're talking about, because unions have been so absent for so long in certain sectors, in certain industries. This has to be about your right to be able to bargain and use a union, not the entitlement of the union to be able to collectively bargain, but for the workers. So I think the Australians used the campaign in between 2007 and 2011 called Your Rights at Work campaign, and it won them the election at the time. And I say won them the election, won the Labour Party in Australia, and that's where they brought in a lot of the right to access stuff was on foot of the Your Rights at Work campaign, which I thought was when I first saw it I was going, that's a very long slogan for a campaign. But they had, when I got to Australia, I saw all the banners everywhere, stickers on cars, stickers on bumper stickers, and it took up branding, people wearing t-shirts walking around the streets. That's the type of thing that needs to happen on something like this.
You see, it's a fundamental right under the Constitution.
See, this is the wrong talk.
No,
because you
not.
say that to a worker in retail.
I'm not saying it's to a worker.
You've lost them.
I'm saying it to the people that are organising it.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying it's to a worker. No.
It has to be simple.
No. I know how to run campaigns. I know how to organise them. Right. But this is organising the campaign.
Look, I'm just expressing my opinion. And look, you can have a different opinion. That's fine.
Listen,
don't run away from the High Courts or judicial reviews.
Just to keep order in the meeting, can you raise your hand if you want to?
Well, I notice nobody answered that question that I put.
Yeah, but there's other people waiting to ask questions as well.
No. As I said, I'll try and keep as quiet as I can, but it's very hard for me.
And finally, Joan, your point is well made on the pieces of legislation that have gone through and been blocked, the water referendum bill, and then the Debenhams one, and then we had a whole, even the banded hours legislation, they attached the money message to it for a long time as well, and that's when the lobbying and the pressure really kicked in. But again, if we can win the consciousness of people around supporting this, then we'll get the lobbying going all across the country. I mean, it was brilliant to watch Willie O'D on this. One day he's against the bill, and the next day after a couple of people called to his clinic, he's absolutely in favour of the bill, and voting the opposite way. It was incredible to watch. He was voting against his own party in the Dáil, and a lot of the Fianna Fáil TDs on the different amendments were disappearing in the middle of it. Like, it was brilliant to watch, to see how they panicked, because there's 10,000 Dunnes Stores workers across the country. They know that they all have family and friends. They didn't want to annoy them. So that's why I think if we're doing a campaign around this, and it goes back to the point I was making to Paul and Joan, take workers like Dunnes Stores workers, who 98% of them say, we want the right to be represented by a trade union of our choice. let them lead this campaign. Don't have it from the big wigs and trade unions running the campaign. Let workers take ownership of this and win it for themselves.
Jimmy, just before you come in, I'm just get signals from Colin. We've 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left, right?
Yeah, so there will be other speakers. So that's
right.
not to put
just to come back on those few points. First of all, Michael O'Brien there, thanks for Mick Barry's support, and you can portray that to him, and that's official that we would support the bill, and also Joan, and I'm saying it in that order because Michael come in first. so we have to do something on the board now. And your points have been answered regarding executive ratifying, and it is correct. It's an abomination, that clause in the Act. But what I would say to you, and it answers kind of a few of the points that have been made there, this bill is a shot across the bows of the trade union. The trade union movement don't want this bill. The trade union movement are happy to hide behind the 1990 Industrial Relations Act, as we know. So now the Dublin Council of Trade Unions motion went through the ICTU conference. It is now policy. They can't ignore it. They tried to. So we said we'll do the bill. So the bill is there now, and this is a warning shot right across our bows. We have two TDs tonight, the first meeting on board. And we'll put that up on our social media tomorrow. So they're going to hope that this fizzles out, So it's not going to fizzle out. We're not going away. And as far as organising campaigns is concerned, we have a bit of experience here at the table and in the room of organising campaigns. There is a very very well-known strategy that was actually built about campaigns. No matter what you're campaigning for, the title should be simple and something that nobody can disagree with. So who can disagree with a Fair Employment Act? You're against fair employment? Like, what's the story? And that's why marriage equality was called marriage equality. It wasn't called gay marriage or anything like that, because it's all against gay marriage. How would you be against marriage equality? How would you be against equality of anything? So that's the thinking in the Fair Employment Act. John's advice there about contacting the spokesperson, we'll take that on board as well. And what Paul was saying in relation to TDs or senators or whatever that don't support the bill, this will expose all of that as the bill up in the North, the Trade Union Freedom Bill, the Alliance Party voted against it. It exposed them for what they are. People talked about, a little bit different and all that. They're not. They're part of the ruling class. I don't care if it's in the North or down here. And I know doubt that Fine Gael are not going to come out and support this. And you'll have the video deals coming out and say, oh, geez, yeah, I support that. But he doesn't. And he'll vote for it if he knows it's going to be defeated. And if he thought it had a chance of being passed and thought he won't turn up, and he said, oh, I couldn't make it there, it's sore throat or something like that, and that's the way it will go on, And I wonder, the absence of some political parties here tonight, is that an indication that they're waiting to see how the ground lies as well? It happened with Right to Water. Some parties sat on the fence for a while till they realised that there was a groundswell of support for it. So if that's going to happen, that will be exposed as well. So we're not going to tread lightly here. This has happened now. We've got the campaign to this far, to this position. So it's up to us, and I'm delighted that everybody is here and follow our social media and all the rest of the sort of thing. And as Michelle said, our website there has plenty of ideas of what you can do.
Just one ask.
I've one other speaker.
Perfect.
Tom, did you want to ask a question, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I have a question, but just a couple of points leading to the question, because first of all, I want to thank the panel tonight. I think it's very good. I want to thank the forum for the work. I think it's very good. It's very laudable enterprise, absolutely. And the idea of building a campaign around is comparable to Right to Water. It's very, very important. And of course I agree with all the points made, particularly they said we need stronger trade union legislation. I think we need stronger trade unions actually as well, of course. They have to act in conjunction with each other. And just to the point that Michelle was making about, younger people post 1990 in terms of wanting to have that experience of not being bound by the industrial relations legislation. I think that trade unions need to be bold and don't allow a situation where the trade disputes were bound. I'm in the luxurious position to represent construction workers. I look after construction workers in IUnite, and I can think of any amount of examples. In recent times, the Vatican's dispute in 2017, 2018, I see many people in the room here who were hugely helped from that. 5 times the employer went to the High Court to seek an injunction. We didn't, because we could be skillful in terms of, if we were with terror crimes, we were doing all sorts of stuff, we had big rats outside the place, but we found ways to skillfully defy it. The same with the crane dispute in 18 and 19, and what we simply did there is we engaged in industrial actions against agencies but conducted our trade disputes outside building sites. So I want to register that point that I think the bill is brilliant, and I think there's all sorts of really good stuff we can do attached to that. I certainly will be arguing with the United Union Construction Branch to discuss this. to consider supporting it as a trade union official. If obviously, and I'm interested in democracy, I don't have a hand in that, but I certainly would raise it, and I've already got an indication from our chair of our branch that we would look, and maybe even have a speaker from the forum for that. So I think there are opportunities to be able to point to where we've, as Michael said earlier, put a dead hand on that legislation, that we don't allow ourselves to be constrained by it. And there's all sorts of follow-up decisions that come from courts around how you engage in industrial actions. I've one particular one during my time in Batu, a construction union as well, where you were given 90 seconds to engage with a worker to support a dispute. But there's all sorts of ways around that, and we have to be, as trade unions, I think, bold. I'm not suggesting that we take the union's funds, put into a wheelbarrow, run down to the High Courts, but we can't. That can't be our starting point. That we're terrified of that. We need to be bold. I suppose that is some questions, and what Jimmy said about the Waterford branch. I asked, is there any trade unions that have actually supported the content of the bill? Because certainly I think construction branch and IUnite would like the idea of slowing down through it, maybe making a contribution if that's helpful, and try to get the branch to endorse it and build from there. So it'll be interesting to hear the panel's views on that. Is there a basis to add to that? Because I think you do need trade unions to support this, as well as obviously politicians to try and move through the dog. Thanks, Chair.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
I'd just like to congratulate the panel, and it's encouraging to hear Jimmy say that this forum is going to be led by from the bottom up, and if that's, I've seen it happen before. The bureaucrats take part in it and run it into the ground, and it's encouraging to hear, particularly from all the panel here, that that's not going to happen.
There's two more hands up. You're going to have to be very brief in what you have to say. Actually, three hands. So take yourself first, then the guy in the green shirt, and then yourself here. And we leave it at that. I think.
My name is Martin Murphy, President of Apache, the Plasters Union, and I'll be putting it to our executive to support the bill and any campaign that comes with it.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That answers your question, Tom.
My name is I have not so much questions as suggestions. I think I like the bill. I like what's being proposed here. I agree with, I'm terribly sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Michael.
Your suggestion. Michael, sorry. About redefining and mentioning what's here. I have been a college student. I'm invested in this. I've always been a bit cynical in this, and being where I'm also heavily invested in politics. There is an issue with engaging young people, people my age in politics, because they're not. There's an attitude of I'm not interested in politics, and this in particular isn't something exciting to people my age, people who aren't politically invested like me. I think we need to find a way to get people invested in this legislation and make it personal for them to get invested and stay invested. Because even if we get people invested, it's important to keep their attention going on campaigning at this for however many years it takes to pass. I'd also suggest that making forums like this more accessible to people, because this is a meeting. We're in IUnite's office. There's only so much space in here, and getting to the office can be awkward for people with disabilities or people who can't leave the house very easily. I'd suggest, would it be possible to find a way to live stream this or put it in a Zoom call, or something that people can join from home and chime in on? Would that be a suggestion to get more people involved in these discussions, because they're important discussions, and I feel that having them solely confined to a room eliminates some important voices from those discussions.
I'm pretty sure we're being live streamed right now.
Finally yourself.
sorry, yeah, this is going to be a short question with possibly a long answer, and I know, so like, sorry. I'm Con, I'm from the industrial workers of the world as well, and as of Tuesday, IUnite. I see mentioned in the bill of, like authorised unions, and I'm just concerned, like maybe the state might decide to crack down on it, like even if this does pass, that the state might decide to crack down on us through that by restricting licenses, stuff like that. And I'd also be interested to know what people's thoughts are on like accepted bodies for our side. Like Dave, you mentioned ISME for their side, but what about us? Like, could GATU be, for example, be an accepted body?
Yes.
Okay, maybe
I'm pretty sure the definition of an accepted body is, well, I'm not pretty sure I know it, the definition of it is in the 2015 Act. And in the definition, you must explain how elections take place, where the funding comes from. It's a whole range of things, but it's for the negotiation of terms and conditions of employment. So CATU is housing issues more so, so I'm not sure they'd be considered an accepted body. But just specifically on the first part, sorry, the first part about restricted licenses, they can do that now anyway. But the way licenses have worked, there's been no new license issued, and maybe Jimmy or Tom might correct me, or someone else might correct me, in decades. The problem we've had is that there's unions have folded and licenses have been left and nothing has been replaced, if you know what I mean. So we haven't had that problem of needing more licenses because licenses have been available in certain instances, but the Minister isn't going to issue a license to CATU tomorrow if that's what you're looking for. They're not issuing new licenses, and I can't remember the last time they did.
Okay, yeah, so I'll be very quick. Tom's point about union backing, at that stage we have now with O'Patsy, which is fantastic, but any union, that's what we're looking for, in the first instance. So any union or union branch that wants a speaker, contact us, tuleft at GAL or gmail.com or whatever, it's on Facebook, Twitter and all these other things as well. So that's no problem to contact us, and we're happy to do that. Martin from O'Patsy, thanks a million, Martin. Fair play to you, brother. First union out of the traps, and was one of the right to water unions now, so hopefully the other right to water unions get on board as well. Con from the IWU about authorised unions and restrictions on them.
Did you say IWU or
IWW?
Yeah.
Again, there's no point in worrying things but haven't happened at this moment in time. We're looking at what exists at this moment in time and how we deal with it. And CATU, I think that question has been answered as well. So I think that covers all the questions that was there.
Because as IWW, like, this is like, I'm on the outside looking in, like you're saying no licenses isn't an issue. It's like, hi.
Yeah, but you remember IUnite as well, didn't you?
I'd like one.
Yeah. Oh, and the other point.
Well, you're not going to get one as well, I'm saying. Like, that's not my choice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm a member of that union.
The other point
I won't say no to that.
Truth, yeah.
If I look for a license, I'll get it.
All that, we do that on a regular basis. This was live streamed, and the committee have been meeting throughout COVID by Zoom. And before COVID happened, we had regular public meetings which were very, very well attended. We had the largest public fringe meeting at the last Dublin ICTU conference, which outnumbered all the other official ones, and you had to leave the building to go for it. It was 75 hours. I think the largest Congress had was 40. So people are interested.
Well, I just want to thank the panel and thank you all for your attendance here tonight, and hopefully, we're going to grow this from here. This is the start, and we'll grow it into something good.
Hello.
Yes.